You have lived 30, 40, perhaps 50 years believing you know yourself, and this presumption is precisely what has prevented you from ever discovering who you truly are. The greatest obstacle to self-knowledge is not ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge already possessed. How can you seek what you believe you have already found? I have spent 4 decades observing men race through their existence in service to a self that does not exist. They defend opinions they absorbed from their fathers, pursue desires nature planted to ensure reproduction, accumulate honors that mean nothing, and call this living authentically. They are somnambulists performing in a dream they mistake for reality, and they will reach death's door never having awakened. What you call yourself is merely an accumulation of accidents. The body your parents gave you, the profession circumstances assigned, the masks society required you to wear, none of this is you. Beneath these layers of illusion lies something you have never glimpsed, and when you finally see it, everything you believed about your life will be revealed as a lie you told yourself to avoid facing truth. This work will strip away every comfortable fiction. What remains will not please you, but it will be real. Your true life awaits if you have courage enough to let the false one die. For 40 years, I have observed men racing through their days, convinced they know themselves, when in truth they have never paused to question the most fundamental presumption of their existence. If you believe you know who you are, this is the fortress wall that must be breached. What you call yourself is nothing but accumulated accidents. The body your parents gave you, the profession circumstances assigned, the opinions your environment installed, the desires nature planted to ensure the species reproduces itself. During my 30th year, after my magnum opus met with the silence of complete indifference, I was forced to confront on my own phantom. The desire for philosophical recognition had seemed essential to my very being until disappointment revealed it as merely the will, using my intellect for its purposes. In that moment of seeing through my own motives, I glimpsed what lay beneath. Not the individual Arthur who craved fame, but the blind, impersonal force that drives all existence, temporarily manifesting in this particular form. Consider what you defend most fiercely when questioned. Your profession, an accident of birth. Your beliefs, absorbed from your milieu like water soaking into cloth. Your ambitions, nature's stratagem to keep you serving its reproductive agenda, yet suggest to a man that his cherished identity is constructed rather than essential, and watch him react with the fury of a cornered animal. This very defensiveness betrays unconscious recognition of the truth. What he protects so desperately is precisely because it is fragile, artificial, vulnerable to the light of examination. The cost of this error is catastrophic. You spend your one precious existence pursuing goals that bring no lasting satisfaction, accumulating possessions that provide no genuine peace, seeking recognition from others who are equally deluded. I have watched men of 70 still chasing approval they failed to secure in childhood, their entire lives squandered in service to a phantom that demanded everything and gave nothing. Begin here. For 3 days, maintain a notebook. Each time you feel compelled to defend, justify, or explain yourself, write it down. Note what triggered the defense and how strongly you felt it. By week's end, patterns will emerge showing which aspects of your phantom self require the most protection. These are the illusions most urgently requiring examination. This simple practice will reveal that the you have been serving does not exist in the way you imagined. Your false self is not a single illusion, but a composite of 5 primary masks, each seeming so, convincing that you mistake it for your essential nature. Yet none constitutes what you truly are. Understanding these 5 components allows you to observe them operating without being enslaved by their demands. The first mask is the body, this organism you inherited from your parents, with its particular features, strengths, and limitations. You did not choose this form, yet you identify with it completely. believing its pains are your pains, its desires your desires. In truth, the body is merely the will's temporary instrument, not your essence. I observed a young merchant in Frankfurt who identified so completely with his inherited business that when economic reversal threatened, he contemplated suicide not because poverty would kill him, but because loss of role would expose the void beneath his constructed identity. The second mask is your social role, merchant, mother, scholar, servant. These are scripts provided by circumstance, not revelations of true nature. Notice how you perform differently in different contexts. Formal with superiors, casual with equals, commanding with subordinates. Which is the real you? None and all they are performances. Skillfully enacted, perhaps, but performances nonetheless. The third mask consists of desires you believe are uniquely yours, but are actually nature's requirements for reproduction and survival. The sexual passion you experience as profound personal feeling is the species ensuring its continuation. The parental devotion you call love is nature's mechanism for offspring survival. The ambition for status serves mating advantage. The intensity of these feelings does not make them yours, it merely indicates their importance to the species' agenda. The fourth mask is composed of opinions you imagine you have reason to independently, yet trace any strong belief to its source and discover it came from outside. Your father's political views, your culture's moral assumptions, your historical moment's fashions. What you call your thoughts are mostly installations from your environment, no more original than a mirror's reflections. The fifth mask is accumulated memory, the story you tell yourself about who you are based on past experiences. But this narrative is highly selective, constantly revised, more fiction than fact. The you of 10 years ago would scarcely recognize the person you claim to be now, yet you believe both to be the same continuous self. This is illusion. This week, select one mask for intensive observation. If you choose professional role, notice every moment you perform it, how you dress, speak, think differently in that context. Document when the role feels most compelling and when you can see through it. This practice reveals the constructed nature of identity and begins the essential work of liberation from these compelling fictions. Living from false identity creates a tragedy that unfolds in the concrete details of your one finite existence. You pursue achievements that bring only temporary satisfaction before emptiness returns. You accumulate possessions that fail to fill the void you refuse to face. You seek recognition from others who are themselves lost in illusion, hoping their approval will confirm the phantom you have constructed. And so you arrive at death's door, never having truly lived your entire span spent serving what never existed. I knew a scholar in Berlin during my lecturing years who spent 4 decades accumulating degrees, publications, and academic honors. In his 60th year, he confessed to me over wine that despite every accomplishment, he had never experienced a single moment of genuine peace. He had served the phantom distinguished professor so completely that the man capable of awakening had been starved of all attention, living his entire span without ever drawing a free breath. Here is the terrible mathematics of the unlived life. When you feed the false self, satisfaction is impossible by definition. You are attempting to nourish an illusion. No amount of achievement can satisfy what does not exist. This explains the desperate hunger that persists despite every success you are pouring water into a vessel with no bottom. Calculate the hours you have spent maintaining your phantom identity, defending your reputation, pursuing status symbols, accumulating evidence of your importance. This energy could have been directed toward genuine understanding, toward seeing what you truly are beneath the mask. Instead, it was squandered on polishing mirrors that reflect nothing real. Consider your relationships formed from this false foundation. You present a mask to another mask, negotiate mutual use, and call this intimacy. The lonely merchant seeks a wife to enhance his social standing. The woman seeks security in children. Both claim to have found love. What they have found is a transaction between phantoms, each using the other to maintain their respective illusions. Genuine connection requires at least one party to have seen through the charade. This week, write to epitaphs for yourself. First, compose what would be said if you continue living from false identity. List the accomplishments, the roles, the accumulated symbols of success. Then write what could be said if you awaken to truth, what genuine transformation, what real seeing, what authentic being might be acknowledged. The contrast between these versions reveals what is at stake. This is not comfortable work, but it is necessary. Let yourself feel the weight of potential tragedy. This feeling may provide the motivation required for genuine transformation to begin. Reality exists in two fundamentally different modes, and grasping this distinction is the foundation of all genuine self-knowledge. Everything you perceive, objects in space, events in time, causes producing effects, belongs to what I call representation. But beneath this phenomenal surface lies something utterly the thing in itself, which I have discovered to be blind, aimless, unconscious. Will, the striving force that is the essence of all existence. During my winter in Weimar with Goethe, we discussed his color theory extensively. He demonstrated that colors are not properties of objects themselves, but emerge in the eye's interaction with light. This insight, though he did not follow it to its ultimate conclusion, parallels my greater recognition. The entire world of objects and separation exists only in representation, structured by the forms your consciousness imposes. Beneath it lies something radically different: space, time, and causality. The very framework within which you perceive reality are not properties of the world itself, but structures your mind projects onto experience. They are, to use the sublime Hindu term, Maya, the veil of illusion that conceals reality's true nature. What you perceive out there is actually generated in here, like a dream that seems external but is internally constructed. Beneath all phenomena lies will, not will as conscious choice, but blind striving without purpose or goal. This is the thing in itself, the reality underlying appearances. It manifests as gravity pulling the stone downward, as the plant growing inexorably toward light, as the spider spinning her web from pure instinct, as the lion's hunger, as your own ceaseless desires. All are expressions of the same force, differentiated only in appearance through the forms of space and time. Your body provides the key to understanding this truth, for it is the one phenomenon you experience both ways: from outside as representation, an object in space with particular properties, and from inside as will, impulse, desire, force. What you feel as hunger from within appears as your body's movement toward food from without. What you experience as sexual desire internally manifests as the body's reproductive behaviors externally. Both are the same reality viewed from different perspectives, will objectifying itself in phenomenal form. This double knowledge of your body as both representation and will opens the door to understanding all reality. What applies to your body applies to all existence. Beneath every phenomenon lies the same blind striving, the same purposeless force. The difference between you and the stone is not essential, but only a matter of degree. Both are. Will manifesting at different levels of objectification. This recognition will seem shocking, even offensive to your sense of human superiority. Yet it is truth, and truth must be faced, regardless of whether it flatters our pretensions. Having recognized that will is the essence underlying all phenomena, you naturally ask, why then do I experience myself as separate from others? What creates the illusion of individual, isolated existence when the truth is unity? The answer lies in what I call the principium individuationis, the principle of individuation, which is nothing other than space and time themselves. While walking along the Rhine one autumn afternoon, I watched the river flowing before me. It appeared as countless separate movements, ripples here, currents there, eddies spinning in apparent isolation. Yet all were one water, one substance, differentiated only by position in space and moment in time. Remove these forms of individuation, and only the unified river remains. So too with consciousness and all existence. What appear as multiple separate beings are one, will differentiated only through spatio-temporal location. Space creates the appearance of here versus there, making you seem externally related to other beings rather than internally one with them. You occupy this location. Another person occupies that location. The space between creates the illusion of separation. Yet space is a form of representation only in the thing in itself. Will knows no spatial separation. When you perceive yourself as distinct from the beggar on the street corner, you are experiencing the effect of this representational form, not touching ultimate reality. Time performs the same function temporally. It makes you seem separate from your past and future selves, from your ancestors and descendants. You believe your grandfather was a different being than yourself, that your grandchildren will be other than you. Yet in the thing in itself, there is no time only, the eternal present of will's manifestation. The will animating you is identical to the will that animated your grandfather and will animate your grandchildren. Temporal separation is phenomenal only, a trick of the consciousness that necessarily perceives in sequential time. The Hindu sages knew this truth and expressed it in their sublime formula, Tattivam Asi, that art thou. You are not the separate wave, but the ocean itself. The sense of being an isolated individual is the veil of Maya concealing the unity underlying all phenomena. When you penetrate this veil, through sustained contemplation, you discover that the suffering of any creature is your suffering. The will driving the king is identical to the will driving the beggar. The boundaries you experience between self and other are phenomenal only. This week, practice this recognition with one person you encounter regularly. Each day, spend 1 minute in their presence, actively recognizing them as yourself in different circumstances. Not as similar to you, but as literally the same will in different spatiotemporal position. Notice any shift in how you perceive and relate to them. This simple practice, maintained consistently, gradually erodes the sense of radical separation and reveals the unity that was always present beneath appearance. You are the universal will itself, temporarily individuated through consciousness, capable of knowing its own nature. This is perhaps the most profound recognition available to human awareness. Will, which in itself is blind and unconscious, has in complex organisms like yourself developed the capacity to recognize itself. You are not a separate soul observing reality from outside. You are reality becoming conscious of itself in this particular location. In my 40th year, sitting in my study here in Frankfurt as evening darkness gathered, I experienced a moment of absolute clarity. The desire to continue my philosophical writing was not mine, but the will's operation through this form. The fatigue I felt was the body's resistance to further exertion, and the awareness observing both phenomena was itself, will's self-knowledge, the universe recognizing its own nature through the instrument of consciousness. For one eternal instant, the illusion of separate selfhood dissolved completely, and what remained was simply existence knowing itself. Here lies the great error of the idealist philosophers who followed Kant. They made consciousness primary, the ground of all being. In truth, will precedes consciousness by eons. Consciousness arose late in evolution as an instrument to serve will's purposes, better navigation through complex environments, more effective acquisition of food, improved success in reproduction. Your intellect exists to serve your body's needs, which are ultimately the will's requirements for this particular manifestation to survive and propagate. Yet in humans, this servant has become sophisticated enough to turn its attention upon the master who created it. Consciousness can examine the very force that produced it, achieving the remarkable feat of will knowing itself. This is your true nature. Neither purely will, for you possess awareness of it, nor purely consciousness, for that awareness emerged from and serves will, but rather the place where blind force becomes aware of its own operation. This double nature dissolves the traditional question of freedom. You are not free to be other than will, manifesting your character, your desires, your very existence flow necessarily from forces beyond your choice. Yet you are free to know what you are, and this knowing changes everything. You cannot escape being will's temporary expression, but you can cease being its unconscious instrument. Knowledge transforms compulsion into observation, blind service into clear seeing. For 10 minutes daily this week, sit and observe your stream of consciousness without attempting to control it. Watch thoughts arise, desires emerge, impulses appear and pass. Notice that you do not choose what arises, it simply presents itself to awareness. This reveals consciousness as will's product rather than an autonomous agent creating reality. The practice provides experiential understanding of your true nature. You are the place where the universe observes itself, where blind striving becomes aware of its own operation. This recognition is the foundation for everything that follows. Having grasped intellectually what you are, you must now transform understanding into direct perception. The foundational practice is this: observe desire without immediately acting upon it. In the space between impulse and action, you discover that wants are not yours, but the will's operations through your form. That satisfaction brings only temporary relief before new desire emerges, and that the cycle is endless unless consciously interrupted. During my early Frankfurt years, I observed a dog in the street, fixated utterly on a piece of meat displayed in a shop window. The animal's entire being oriented toward that single object body, trembling, small whines escaping its throat, every faculty consumed by wanting. When a customer finally emerged and tossed it a scrap, the dog devoured it frantically, then immediately resumed searching for more. In that moment, I saw human desire with perfect clarity. We are that dog, driven by impulses we call ours, briefly satisfied, then driven onward to the next want. The only difference is that we construct elaborate narratives to disguise the mechanical nature of the process. When any desire arises for food, for recognition, for pleasure, for relief from discomfort, pause before automatically acting. Simply observe the impulse present in consciousness without immediately obeying its demand. This reveals desire as a force that arises rather than as something you choose. Notice where you feel it in your body. The hunger manifesting as hollowness in your belly, the craving for approval, creating tension in your chest, the sexual impulse generating specific physical sensations. These are the will's operations, not commands from your essential self. Track what happens after desires are satisfied. Enjoy your meal thoroughly. Then observe. How long does satisfaction last? Within hours, hunger returns. Achieve the recognition you sought. Savor the moment of validation. Then watch as its power to please fades within days, leaving you seeking the next approval. This pattern repeats endlessly. Want creates tension. Satisfaction brings brief relief. Emptiness returns. New want emerges. The cycle is mechanical, predictable, ultimately futile if you seek lasting peace through satisfaction. Your strongest desires reveal their true nature when examined honestly. Sexual passion, which you experience as profound personal feeling, serves reproduction nature's requirement that the species continue. Ambition for status serves competitive advantage in the ancient game of securing mates and resources. The accumulation of possessions serves survival instincts formed when scarcity threatened existence. None of these is truly yours. All are the species speaking through your particular nervous system, using you as its instrument for propagation. This week, choose one persistent desire and practice the pause before acting on it. When the impulse arises, sit with it for 5 minutes while observing. What thoughts accompany this wanting? Does the intensity increase, or does it eventually crest and diminish? By week's end, you will have experienced desire as temporary arising rather than permanent command. This simple practice begins the liberation from unconscious servitude. The recognition that you are essentially identical with all other beings cannot remain philosophical abstraction. It must become direct perception through sustained practice. This is the foundation of genuine compassion. Systematically recognizing your own will, operating in every creature you encounter. When another's suffering is perceived as your own, morality ceases to be external commandment and becomes natural response. On my daily walk several years ago, I encountered a horse being beaten by its owner for refusing to pull an overloaded cart. The animal's exhaustion was evident in its trembling legs and labored breathing. The man's frustration equally clear in his reddened face and violent gestures. In that moment, I perceived with absolute clarity. Both were will in conflict with itself, the horse's instinct for self-preservation opposed to the human's will to exploit its labor. Neither was free in their actions, both suffered in their way. And I was both of them the same striving force expressing itself in three apparently separate forms, united fundamentally in suffering and the blind operation of nature. Begin this practice with those nearest to you, family members, neighbors, those you encounter regularly. When observing them, recognize that their desires are identical to yours in structure, however different in content. The mother's fierce love for her child mirrors any attachment you have felt. The merchant's anxiety about his ledgers is your anxiety, manifesting in different contexts. The servant's weariness after a long day is the same exhaustion you have experienced. Focus on this shared signature rather than surface differences. Gradually extend this recognition outward in concentric circles. To strangers on the street, to those you dislike or find difficult, to animals you encounter, ultimately to all life. The beggar's hunger is structurally identical to yours, the same will, seeking satisfaction through this particular organism. The dog's fear when threatened mirrors your own fear exactly. The tree's inexorable growth toward sunlight is the same blind striving you experience as desire. All are manifestations of the one will, differentiated only through the forms of space and time. The practice becomes truly transformative when applied to those you find unwelcome or threatening. The person who has wronged you is will harming itself through ignorance of unity. They are you, acting blindly from character and circumstance they did not choose. This recognition does not excuse harmful action or eliminate the need for appropriate response on the phenomenal level, but it removes personal enmity, the sense of having been uniquely targeted by a separate malicious will. They could not have acted otherwise, being what they are, driven by forces they do not understand. This week, choose one person you find difficult and spend 5 minutes daily contemplating them with this practice. Recognize their desires as will striving, their suffering as your suffering, their limitations as arising from character they did not choose. Note any shifts in perception. This simple exercise, maintained consistently, gradually dissolves the hard boundaries of separation and reveals the unity that was always present beneath apparent multiplicity. The recognition of unity leads necessarily to a vision that most humans cannot bear. If you are all beings, then you are not only the victim but also the torturer, not only the prey but also the predator. The entire drama of existence reveals itself as will, in conflict with itself endless suffering, serving no purpose beyond its own perpetuation. Most who glimpse this truth retreat immediately to comfortable illusions. You must learn to bear the unbearable without either despair or denial. In my youth in Hamburg, I witnessed a public execution, a murderer hanged for killing several people. The crowd jeered at his death, satisfied that justice had been served. I perceived something different and more terrible. The murderer was driven by character and circumstance beyond his choice. The executioner simply followed the law. The victims' families sought revenge to ease their pain, and all were will in tragic conflict, none fundamentally free, all suffering, all expressions of the same blind force. This vision haunted me for years, until I understood it was not horror to flee, but truth to integrate into understanding. When you encounter suffering in yourself, others, or nature, resist the impulse to immediately avert your gaze, rationalize it, or seek distraction. The capacity to witness suffering clearly is strength, not morbidity. What you can see clearly, you can transcend. What you refuse to see controls you from the shadows of denial. Notice the mechanisms your mind employs to avoid seeing fully. You rationalize, they deserved it. Distance yourself. That's not my concern. Or engage in spiritual bypassing. Everything happens for a reason. Each strategy preserves comfortable illusions at the cost of truth. Your own suffering becomes easier to bear when recognized as not uniquely personal, but the universal condition. This is not minimizing your pain, but seeing it as one instance of existence's fundamental nature. The young man whose heart is broken suffers identically to the widow whose husband dies. Both are will thwarted, experiencing the pain that is life's inevitable signature. When you stop taking suffering personally, stop demanding to know why me, you can meet it with the strength of one who understands reality rather than fighting against it. Once you have seen clearly that suffering is woven into existence's structure, not an accident to be fixed, but the necessary consequence of will's nature, a profound possibility opens. You can cease serving will blindly. This is not suicide, which is merely will destroying one manifestation while remaining trapped in wanting. Rather, it is gradual withdrawal from identification with striving itself, the beginning of what the saints and mystics have always taught as liberation. This week, deliberately expose yourself to awareness of suffering rather than avoiding it. Read of catastrophes, observe those in pain, contemplate the reality of the slaughterhouse that feeds your city. But practice clear seeing, neither wallowing in horror nor numbing to it, simply recognizing each instance as will in conflict with itself, as yourself suffering in different form. When your own pain arises, see it as the universal pattern manifesting in your location. This transforms your relationship to suffering from personal affront to impersonal recognition. Awakening does not require retreat from the world or abandonment of ordinary activities. The transformation occurs not in what you do, but in the quality of awareness with which you engage. I have maintained virtually identical routines for nearly 3 decades here in Frankfurt. Rising at 7, cold ablutions, breakfast at 8, riding until noon, 2 hours walking regardless of weather, dining at the Englisher Hall, evening reading. To casual observers, I am merely a creature of rigid habit, perhaps even pathologically inflexible. They miss the point entirely. I maintain this external regularity precisely because it eliminates countless trivial decisions, freeing consciousness for genuine observation. The ordinary man is enslaved by his routines, performing them mechanically while his attention scatters in 1,000 directions. I employ routine as conscious tool, each activity performed with full awareness, rather than absent-minded automatism. The difference is invisible to the external observer, but absolute in internal experience. When you establish simple, sustainable patterns for daily necessities, when you eat, sleep, exercise, work, you conserve the energy that most waste in endless small deliberations about trivial matters. Should I take coffee or tea? Should I walk now or later? Should I dine here or there? These decisions drain vitality better directed toward understanding. Choose arbitrary patterns that suit your circumstances and maintain them consistently, not from compulsion but from recognition of their utility. The awakened individual performs necessary social roles as worker, neighbor, perhaps parent or spouse, but with an essential difference. Where others believe these roles constitute their identity, you recognize them as temporary performances. You can fulfill them skillfully, even excellently, while knowing they are not what you are. This creates a strange freedom, complete engagement without identification, like an actor fully committed to the role, while remaining aware it is performance. In your interactions with others, the transformation manifests subtly but profoundly. My housekeeper displays characteristic foolishness. This is simply her nature, determined by limited intelligence and narrow experience she did not choose. I observe it as I might observe a dog following its instincts, with neither anger nor expectation that it could be otherwise. This is not contempt which would require believing she should be different, but clear-eyed recognition of what is. When she performs her duties adequately, I acknowledge it. When she fails, I correct the situation without personal animosity. This week, establish one simple routine you will maintain regardless of circumstance. As you perform it, bring complete attention to each action rather than executing it mechanically. Notice the difference between unconscious habit and conscious routine. In your daily activities, practice labeling. This serves necessary function versus this serves only phantom identity. Gradually eliminate the latter. The life that emerges from this simplification has a quality of lightness, of energy no longer squandered on maintaining illusions. Most human relationships are transactions between phantom selves, mutual manipulation dressed as connection, need disguised as love, fear posing as devotion. I learned this truth harshly through my relationship with my mother. She required her children to reflect well upon her social standing. I required intellectual freedom to pursue truth wherever it led. Both of us sought to use the other for our respective phantom identities' purposes. When I finally withdrew from this arrangement at age 26, she lamented my ingratitude, by which she meant I would no longer serve as instrument for her self-image among her salon friends. This pattern operates in nearly all conventional relationships. Observe honestly. Most involve implicit bargaining. I will affirm your identity if you affirm mine. I will fulfill your emotional needs if you satisfy mine. I will not challenge your comfortable illusions if you protect me from confronting my own. This is not love, but trade agreement, and it dissolves the moment one party ceases providing what the other requires. Genuine relationship becomes possible only when at least one party has seen through the illusion of separate selfhood. When you recognize another as essentially yourself in different circumstances, when you perceive their suffering as your own suffering, their will as your will, then something other than transaction can occur. This does not mean emotional enmeshment or loss of appropriate boundaries. The mother who smothers her child with possessive devotion is not compassionate, but enslaved by need disguised as love. True compassion recognizes unity while maintaining clear boundaries. You can see others' suffering as fundamentally identical to your own, without attempting to rescue them from consequences of their nature or becoming entangled in their dramas. Each being acts from their character as inevitably as water flows. Downhill, the foolish will act foolishly, the cruel cruelly, the wise wisely, all determined by constitution they did not choose. Your task is to see this clearly and respond appropriately, not to exhaust yourself demanding they be other than they are. The capacity for genuine relationship requires first the capacity for solitude. One who cannot bear being alone will enter relationship from desperation, seeking another to fill the void they refuse to face directly. Only someone complete in themselves, which is to say, someone who has recognized their essential nature as will rather than as separate ego, can truly connect with another without attempting to consume or be consumed. This week, observe transactional patterns in your relationships without judgment. When someone seeks something from you, notice whether they offer implicit trade. When you seek something from others, observe the same. Practice this formula. I see your suffering as identical to mine. Recognition of unity, yet I am not required to satisfy your wants. Maintenance of boundary. This creates relationship from strength rather than need, from clarity rather than illusion, the only foundation upon which genuine connection can be built. Suffering remains universal, even for those who have seen through illusion, but the relationship to it transforms completely. In my 43rd year, I fled Berlin's cholera epidemic to this city. Others panicked, seeing death as personal catastrophe. I observed my own fear arising the body's instinct for self-preservation, perfectly natural, while recognizing it as merely will's operation through this particular form. When illness came years later, I experienced pain clearly, but without the additional layer of suffering that comes from believing I should not be in pain. The distinction is crucial. Pain is inevitable, the body ages, desires are thwarted, loss occurs. But most human suffering is pain multiplied by narrative. This shouldn't happen to. This is unfair. Why must I endure this? These stories create a second suffering far worse than the original pain. When you eliminate the narrative while remaining with the pure sensation or circumstance, the experience transforms profoundly. Not pleasant pain remains unpleasant by its nature, but bearable, no longer catastrophic. Notice how suffering multiplies when you resist what is. The physical discomfort of illness is compounded by mental torment. I hate this. This must end. I cannot bear this. Each resistance adds weight to the burden. Practice meeting pain with observation rather than resistance. The pain remains, let us not pretend otherwise, but the suffering born of fighting it dissolves. You discover you can bear far more than you imagined when you stop adding struggle to the unavoidable difficulty. Art offers something unique. Temporary liberation from will's tyranny. When I attend the opera here at the Stadttheater and become genuinely absorbed in the music, not attending to be seen, not demonstrating cultural sophistication, but purely experiencing the tones and their relationships, I cease willing entirely for those hours. I become what I call pure will-less subject, contemplating form without desire. Time stops, for time is will's form of manifestation. The endless cycle of wanting and satisfaction halts. This is not distraction, which would be will seeking relief through diversion, but actual transcendence. The aesthetic state is practice for complete liberation. In contemplating beauty, whether in music, painting, poetry, or nature's grandeur, you lose yourself. Not the false self of phantom identity, but even the necessary self of embodied will temporarily ceases its demands. For those precious moments, you exist as pure perceiving consciousness, and in this state you taste the peace that denial of will achieves permanently. Establish a practice of aesthetic contemplation this week. 3 times. Spend at least 30 minutes in complete absorption, attending a concert, contemplating a painting in your city's gallery, reading poetry with full attention, or observing nature's beauty during your walks. Notice when you slip into willing, judging the performance, comparing it to others, wanting it to continue or end, versus remaining in pure contemplation. This capacity for will-less perception strengthens with practice and provides regular respite from existence's inherent burden. The terror of death arises entirely from false identification with your phenomenal self. When you believe you are this body and this personality, death appears as absolute annihilation, the extinction of all you hold dear, the end of consciousness itself. My father's death when I was 17, likely suicide by drowning in the canal behind our family warehouse, forced me to confront mortality early. I watched my mother display conventional grief while resuming her social activities within weeks, and I recognized that both his terror of existence and her superficial mourning arose from the same fundamental error, believing the phenomenal person was all that existed. But you are not what you imagine yourself to be. You are not this particular body, which is merely a temporary formation of matter organized by will's force. You are not this personality with its memories and characteristics, which is phenomenal only and will perish with the brain that sustains it. What you essentially are is the will itself, temporarily individuated through this organism's consciousness, but identical in substance to the will animating all existence. What dies when your body fails? The particular manifestation dissolves this specific pattern of organized matter, returns to simpler forms. The personality, with its accumulated experiences, ceases memories, preferences. The entire structure of individual consciousness perishes with the nervous system. But the will that animated this form cannot die any more than matter itself can be destroyed. It continues indestructibly in infinite other manifestations. You die in the way a wave dies, returning to the ocean that was always your true substance. This is not the personal immortality religion's promise, where your individual consciousness continues forever in some ethereal realm enjoying eternal reward. Such notions are comforting fictions designed to console those who cannot bear reality. Neither is it the absolute annihilation materialists proclaim, where consciousness's end means you cease entirely. Both miss the truth. The particular consciousness ends, but you in your essence as will persist in all manifestation. After your death, the will that was you will be present in every newborn child, every sprouting seed, every creature that draws breath. You are already all beings. Death merely dissolves the illusion of separation that made you seem distinct. This recognition fundamentally alters your relationship to mortality. What is there to fear in losing what was never ultimately real. The ego that will perish was a temporary construction. The true self-will itself cannot perish because it was never born, never separate, never the individual entity that could experience extinction. You were never the wave. You were always the ocean. Death is not transformation, but revelation of what was always true. This week, contemplate your own death directly. Imagine the moment of bodily failure, consciousness fading, the organism's inevitable dissolution. Notice the fear that arises and question what exactly you fear losing. That fear reveals remaining identification with phenomenal self. Practice this recognition. The body that will die is not what I am. The personality that will dissolve was never my essence. The will that I essentially am cannot die. This is not denial of mortality's reality, but clear seeing of what actually ends and what cannot end. You are not free in the way you imagine. You did not choose your character, whether timid or bold, generous or stingy, intelligent or dull. You did not select your desires, your talents, your fundamental nature. All flow from heredity and early formation entirely beyond your control. You can no more change your essential character than you can alter your height through force of will. Every action you take flows necessarily from this given nature, responding to circumstances as inevitably as the stone falls earthward when released. I learned this truth harshly when I scheduled my lectures at the University of Berlin, deliberately at the same hour as Hegel's, confident that students would choose truth over fashionable obscurantism. They chose Hegel's overcrowded auditorium, leaving mine nearly empty. I raged initially at their stupidity, their inability to recognize genuine philosophy. Then recognition dawned. They acted from their character as inevitably as water flows downhill. The need for fashionable doctrine, the comfort of conventional thinking, the safety of following the crowd, these determined their choice as absolutely as any physical law. Neither they nor I were free in any conventional sense. Yet here is the profound paradox that resolves the ancient problem. Though you cannot choose your character or escape the determinism of nature, consciousness that recognizes itself as will can cease being will's blind instrument. This is not will choosing against itself, which would be logical impossibility, but rather a kind of grace, a possibility that opens when awareness penetrates deeply enough into its own nature. You cannot escape being will's manifestation, but you can cease serving it unconsciously. This is the only freedom worth having. Understanding determinism transforms your relationship to others' actions entirely. When someone acts foolishly, cruelly, or harmfully, the question is no longer, why would they do that? But rather, of course they did that, being what they are. How could they have done otherwise? This removes personal offense while maintaining clear assessment. The fool acts foolishly because he is a fool, determined by limited intelligence he did not choose. You need not approve, but you cease being surprised or morally outraged by what necessarily follows from character. The liberation comes in accepting necessity rather than fighting it futilely. Fighting against reality, demanding you be other than you are, resenting your nature's limitations, raging at others' inevitable failings, is the primary source of unnecessary suffering. When you cease this struggle and accept what is, including your own determined character, a profound peace becomes possible. Not resignation to fate in the sense of passive despair, but recognition of reality that allows you to act from understanding rather than blind reactivity. This week, document your choices. Each significant decision, note what options appeared and what preference emerged. Then analyze honestly. Did you choose your preferences, or did they arise from your nature? This practice reveals the determined nature of what we call free choice, while also revealing where genuine freedom recognition rather than blind impulse becomes possible. The freedom worth having is not freedom to be other than you are, but freedom to know what you are and act from that knowledge rather than from ignorance. I have led you through the territory of understanding, from recognizing the phantom self through grasping your true nature as will, to developing practices of clear seeing and discovering how awakened awareness manifests in daily life. Now I present the final and highest teaching. Genuine liberation lies in ceasing to serve will's endless demands. Having recognized will's nature as blind, purposeless striving that can never be satisfied, you can withdraw from identification with its compulsions. This is not suicide, which would be merely will destroying one manifestation while remaining utterly trapped in wanting. The suicide still wills. He wills to escape suffering, to end the unbearable situation, to assert control through the ultimate act. He has not seen through will, but remains its desperate servant. Rather, what I teach is the gradual cessation of willing itself, the turning of consciousness away from desire toward pure perception. This is the path the saints and mystics of all traditions have walked, though they clothe it in their varied religious languages and supernatural claims. In my 72nd year now, approaching the body's inevitable failure, I observe consciousness's operations with a clarity earned through decades of practice. Desire still arises for comfort, for the continuation of this particular manifestation, for completion of remaining work, but I am no longer its servant. The body's wants are noted without being automatically obeyed. The ego's final struggles for significance are observed without identification. For the first time, I taste fully the peace that comes when willing ceases, not death's peace, but the peace available while yet breathing. The awakened individual neither celebrates existence, which would be will affirming itself, nor seeks death, which would be will despairing. Instead, a quality of acceptance emerges. This is what is. You continue functioning, fulfilling duties, engaging with what arises, but without the desperate quality of one who believes it all ultimately matters in the way the ego demands. You walk through the dream knowing it is dream, participating while remaining inwardly free. Begin a daily practice of will-less perception. 10 minutes minimum, sitting in silence, neither seeking anything nor avoiding anything. Simply exist as awareness itself. This is not meditation with goals, but practice of the very state that denial of will achieves. Notice when wanting arises to end the sitting, to accomplish something, to achieve special states, and return to simple presence. Over months and years, this practice plants the seed of ultimate liberation. The teaching is complete. What you do with it depends on character you did not choose, whether you are among the few capable of bearing truth or among the many who must remain in comfortable illusion. I can only present what I have seen through 40 years of rigorous contemplation. You must test it against your own experience and discover whether it leads to the liberation I promise, not bliss, but peace. The peace of no longer struggling against reality, the freedom of no longer serving what you are not, the strange lightness of existing without the burden of a self that never truly existed. Your true life begins precisely when you find yourself, which is to say, when you lose the false self entirely and discover what remains.